So here we are at the beginning of ideology, the war of ideas. I took the liberty to play the first couple of phases to begin with. First, the resource phase. Everybody drew 3 cards because everybody's at 3 global influence. Then the trading phase. Everybody held their cards with the exception of the fascists who threw an economic card away. Why? Well, they had two. They had some reason they didn't want it. They had a pair of them. I'm not sure why they didn't want to. In particular, maybe they were hoping for more military or something. But they threw that away and drew another card. Everyone else was happy with their hands because they don't really know what's going on yet. To the development phase, the only person who did develop were the fascists. They had one of each card, so they played, and they've raised themselves potentially to being able to get 4 cards per turn from now on. I think that's a good move overall if you have the cards, and they made the choice to play for that, I guess. I'm not sure what the thinking was there. Now we're at the foreign phase. Now, here's where one of the options comes in, which is on the first turn of the game you could draw 2 of these instead of just 1. I'm just going to draw 1 and play with the base game, but I think in 4 or 5 players, which is where that option comes into play, that probably makes for a less contentious beginning where people can feather their nests a little earlier. But I made the decision to play just the base game as it was, even if I think probably in most 4 or 5 player games I would rather start with this. So we see Cuba. Okay, Cuba is next to Central America, Colombia, and the United States. Big bonus for the U.S. They got something next to them. One of the options says on the first turn of play, you don't have to worry about what's next to you. That's actually probably a bigger bonus to the imperialists than anyone else. Okay, so now we go in the foreign phase, in player order. People get to play their cards. And these are one at a time. We got to look at, it's a level 1 region, which is really cool for the imperialists. So they're going to use their global colonization ability, and they're going to play an economic influence over there at Cuba. Over to the U.S., who's also doesn't have to pay to get in here, but they have disadvantages to using military elsewhere, so they're going to play a military influence in Cuba. And already we're beginning to see people are laying claims to Cuba. The fascists played their cards. The communists would have to play 2 cards to go in. But here's the thing. What can they do otherwise? Well, economic conflict is going to cost them additional, and they already have the distance. Are they adjacent to anything they can attack? Not really. So their only option, as far as I'm concerned, would be to play into the economic influence. Here's the problem. There's already one there, and they can't raise that above the current dev level, from my understanding. They also can't play their military influence because they don't have the distance penalty for that. So, and industry does not help that? No, industry is defensive. So they're going to pass. And then we go to the Islamics. We have a couple of cultural, so they could actually get in there, I believe. And they will do so. They're going to play 2 cultural cards, one of which goes in their discard pile, and one of which goes into Cuba. Cuba's full. Nobody can expand into it anymore. So we go on, and we'll be hitting the conflict phase, and this is also done in turn order. The imperialists have the first option to conflict. They don't get their colonization advantage here. They don't have a pair, so they can't do anything. So they're basically stuck. Had they used these cards perhaps to bonus themselves elsewhere, something good could have happened. But they're not next anywhere. They can't do anything, so they're going to pass. The U.S., however, is adjacent. They have cultural. They're going to attack, and they're going to attack in Cuba. And they're allowed to, because the only thing you're not allowed to do is military conflict in the current value. Now, you'd always be allowed to do cultural. Do the fundamentalists have an additional culture? No, they don't. They spent 2 of them on their hand. So, and do they have a defense? They do not. They're able. They didn't have to pay the distance penalty. Okay, let's say they have that card then in their hand. They're able to deflect the U.S.'s cultural attack on Cuba. But the U.S. has a second cultural card which they can immediately play. And at this point, the Islamicists don't have anything, and they've been defeated in Cuba. Now this is big, because the U.S. is going to gain Cuba if nothing changes. Fascists have no cards left. Communists, well, they have a defensive bonus. Actually, let's see, because they can play cultural without initiating. No, they're defensive as well. Innovation is economic without distance. Okay, I have to check all these because, okay. So I have 2 economics. I might as well go in somewhere. I can do an economic conflict because we're neutral. Do I want Cuba? Or would I rather attack the U.S. directly? I can do that as well, I believe. Their defense is against cultural. I'm going to make the choice to attack the U.S. I think they're getting an advantage, and I don't think it helps me any to attack the imperialists there. The U.S. has no cards to defend. So now there's a communist economic interest there. Now what's kind of cool about this is not only do the communists have some power in the U.S., but they can actually discard that card during, I don't remember what stage it is, but then weakening the United States in terms of its own strength. So its strength would go down to a 2 due to the communists' infiltration of their government. We just did the communists. Well, there's nothing I can do with this economy card, so I have to pass. And now we go back around, and we have very little here that we can do. We have a cultural and an economic, neither of which we can reach, so we have to pass, pass, pass. Military, I can't use that for anything. Pass. And we had a pass here. So that's the end of that phase. Now we go to the diplomacy phase, and the United States is beginning to look stronger. I'm going to take some time to think about this, and then I'll come back. So, the diplomatic phase has shaken out, and the biggest was the imperialists, Britain in particular, made peace with everyone. They believe it's to their advantage not to get involved because they have this little edge right now. And they got early agreements from the U.S. and from Germany to negotiate a peace status, which is, hey, you guys are already in the lead. I'm not going to oppose you particularly. And they're like, that's cool because we're afraid everyone else is. So they made that agreement early on. But then the communists said, I'm going to target the people who are in the lead. In particular, that's going to be the capitalists and the fascists. And the fascists were perfectly happy with that. But having someone they're at war with, they decided not to go to war with the capitalists, which they thought about pretty hard and kind of desired, because those are their competitors in terms of at this level. And then the Islamics kind of said, hey, you know, I don't want to cut peace with people who don't want peace in particular, which is to say, I don't want to make peace with the fascists. I'll stay neutral towards them because I want to keep the ability to do economic competition, although I'm not terribly good at that. I'm not bad at it. But, and likewise with the capitalists, but they did cut a deal with the communists and said, hey, let's have peace. We'll be friendly together. So that's the only non-imperialist piece. Okay, so let's go on. For the assessment phase, a couple of things happen. Let me make sure I get these in the right order. The game takes up a lot of space for something that doesn't have a lot of components. But the first thing is the development levels. Hey, I can put this over here. So, for development level, we have to look. Well, the only one who went up or changed, to tell you the truth, is Germany. Germany is now up to level 4. And that means their fascists have a global influence of 4. Now we assess controlled regions. Everybody still controls the majority of the influence cards in their regions. The only one who doesn't have that already is in the United States. There is a communist influence there, but they have 8 others. Now the final thing is the U.S. controls the majority in Cuba, so they now control Cuba as a part of their territory. And that also brings them up to 4 total influence. Okay? And now we go to the turn order phase, and let's look to see what happens. The capitalists are at 4, so they trade with the imperialists. The fascists are at 4, so they trade with the imperialists, but they're tied with the capitalists, so they don't go any further there. Everyone else is at 3, so it stands. And we start the next turn. And this is a good place for me to come up for air and send this one up as well as the introduction. I, of course, will be doing less explaining, less videoing as we go. I think we've seen the basic mechanism at play here. We got some cards discarded, etc. And maybe things will get interesting. Nobody, interestingly enough, and this is probably because I'm just starting, went out and bought themselves advancements. I'm kind of thinking to myself, wow, some of these people have a couple of cards in their hand that they didn't get to use. Maybe they made mistakes of some sort or another. That's the feeling I get, but, well, we'll see how it plays out and what happens.